Classified documents about Ukraine, Iran, and UK found in Biden's possession. Plus, the Republicans try to put a stop to feds working with big tech for censorship. And could conflict in the Pacific lead to World War III? To break down all of these international headlines, I'm going to bring in counterterrorism and foreign policy expert Lisa Daftari, who's also the editor of Foreign Desk. She joins me from Los Angeles. Lisa, hello, welcome. Great to see you again.
Thank you. Wonderful to be with you.
Okay, so Lisa, so much to discuss. I want to begin with these U.S. classified documents that are related to Ukraine, Iran, and UK found in Biden's private office. So Lisa, some of the items discovered are related to U.S. intelligence memos and briefing materials during his time as vice president under President Obama. So why would Biden have possession of these documents?
Great question. Obviously, these don't sound like documents that should be, laying around someone's house, whether it's next to the Corvette or
Right.
next to the dog, right?
Yeah, in the
Obviously,
garage of all places.
right, exactly. Why would he be in possession of these documents that relate to very sensitive foreign policy matters that we are dealing with even today, right? So, this is a lot of people talk about the Biden presidency, particularly with regard to foreign policy being the 2.0 of the Obama presidency, in which he served as vice president, right? Uh, Particularly with regards to Iran, the Iran nuclear deal, wanting to normalize relations with the mullahs in Iran. Of course, now the Biden administration has created some daylight. They have moved back from the JCPOA, the nuclear deal. But why would he have these very sensitive documents in his possession that could very well undermine the United States, bring out a lot of vulnerability, share a lot of intelligence secrets that should not be shared with anyone? And of course, there will be investigations, we hope, into this matter to bring out more transparency so that we can understand why he had these documents, why they were in his possession, why they were not taken care of. And we're glad that some sort of whistle was blown on all this. But Jeanette, I also want to point out that these documents were found before the midterms here in the United States, but yet we have just learned about them now. So, of course, this is already being made into a political matter. It was already hidden from American voters and not, announced at the time of its findings. But really, what is the timing all of this all about? What's the Democrat Party trying to do, and why would they only now tell the American public about this?
Okay, now, Lisa, Pentagon officials are warning of a possible resurgence of the Islamic State this year and a potential new branch of ISIS. Well, the Department of Defense, they've actually cautioned against this announcement. So what's your reaction to all of this?
Right. Well, if they're coming out with an announcement like this now, we better believe that it's probably too late. Meaning those vulnerabilities, those political vacuums, anything that would allow a terror organization from flourishing and growing and prospering in a region in the Middle East or Africa, which is where they are telling us these groups are now growing. They've already these vulnerabilities already exist, right? There has to be a very dedicated effort to rooting out terror, whether it's a small branch, a bigger branch, or a very large branch. In the past year, I should say in the past couple of months, the Foreign Desk reported on two warnings. One is ISIS reemerging in this calendar year, and the second is that Al Qaeda has doubled down and they're going back to perhaps airplane attacks, and they're going basically back into their caves to plan the next 9/11. And let's just really separate these two groups for a moment. ISIS, of course, being more of a do-it-yourself type of terror organization where they find recruits all throughout the world, in Canada, the United States, and Europe, and everywhere else. And they say, you could come to Syria or Iraq to fight for us, but you could also carry out a terror attack in your own neighborhood by using household items. You can use your car to ram into 2 or 3 or 10 people. You'll become a martyr. You can stab people with a kitchen knife. You can use an axe. These are actually, this is the propaganda material that they use. Whereas Al Qaeda is into basically retreating and then having a large scale attack like what we saw in 9/11, and basically a surprise. So we have learned that both of these threats are now on the horizon for the West, both a large scale attack like Al Qaeda and small scale attacks like ISIS, but that they both have had opportunity to grow. I also want to point out that Al Qaeda, we found them in Afghanistan. The United States withdrew from last year. So, of course, more vulnerabilities and political pockets in the Middle East and Africa where they can flourish.
Either way, terrifying. Absolutely. Okay, so ongoing reports, Lisa, show that federal law enforcement and the White House have regularly communicated with social media companies like Facebook and Twitter, pressuring the companies to remove posts and accounts for a range of issues, including questioning the COVID-19 vaccine. So Republicans in the House have now filed a new legislation that would ban federal employees from working with big tech companies to censor Americans. So Lisa, what would this bill prevent federal officials from specifically doing?
This is basically a bill that says the sky is blue, right? Does it really need to be said that federal law enforcement or the government or government agents should not be interfering with private social media companies to control the narrative? It's mind boggling. We thought we are going on social media to find banana bread recipes and all other kinds of useless information or find out who went to what vacation and look at their pictures of their young kids. But meanwhile, the government has been controlling all sorts of information. They've been obviously controlling the narrative on our elections, on COVID, on anything else where they really want to, whether instill fear or direct the public into a certain way of thinking. It's mind boggling that they have used these social media platforms as tools against people, and they will continue to do so. I don't believe that this bill will, in fact, deter whether it is on the part of the social media companies from using their platforms as tools and censoring what they want and what they don't want, and the government from interfering in that censorship. So it's a horrific thing. I mean, for us as consumers of social media, for us to be on those platforms and to actually give this or the government an opportunity, or these social media platforms an opportunity to control what they're showing us, what they're feeding young people, what they're seeing. It's really a wake up call for all of us.
Now, speaking of the Biden administration, Lisa, there are reports that they're opposing Jewish prayer at a holy site in Jerusalem, saying that it would be unacceptable for Israel to end the restriction on Jewish prayer at the Temple Mount, which is, it's of course a restriction that only allows Muslims to pray at the site. So, Lisa, why is the Biden administration even getting involved in something like this?
It's mind-boggling. The Biden administration has its brand of pick and choose foreign policy. They get involved when they want to get involved, and they don't get involved on matters that are much more important. I'll give you an example. Right now, there are young people brutally being murdered on the streets of Iran for peaceful
Yeah.
protest. No one's doing an investigation. They're not calling an emergency meeting of the UN. The FBI is not getting involved. Biden's not saying anything. No one's really getting involved. But then you have one journalist who was killed. And of course, any loss of life is tragic. I'm not trying to belittle that, but I'm just trying to juxtapose their pick and choose kind of approach. One Al Jazeera reporter was killed, and the Palestinians were up in an uproar, and the FBI are in an uproar, and there's certain lawmakers that are calling for it, and the UN is doing an investigation for one lost life. And then you look at the Temple Mount, which is on Israel's territory. Obviously, the Jordanians control it right now, but when Christians want to pray there, they have to wear these yellow garbs. We reported on this on the Foreign Desk this past week. It's horrific. I mean, it's a throwback to the Holocaust, where you had to have a yellow star if you were Jewish. They're making people marked. They're marking you because of your religion to go pray at a place where every religion should pray side by side. And meanwhile, for Jews to go there and pray, their neighbors are calling it an act of war. And because of that, the Biden administration is now getting involved. I mean, again, think about all the other important matters where the Biden administration is not giving their attention, all the loss of life that we're seeing around the world, and the Biden administration not worrying or not caring. Look at the women of Afghanistan not able to leave their homes or go to school. I mean, there's so many tragedies right now, and so many real crises that need the attention of the White House, and they're just not getting it.
And then not only the White House, but it sounds like now there's reports that the EU is meddling in the relationship between Israel and Palestine.
Right, absolutely. So the EU definitely has an axe to grind. They've never really been truly, which is interesting, because when you look at the establishment of the state of Israel, it was obviously the Europeans who spearheaded that, along with the United States, to give the nod. The idea of having a Jewish state established once again after biblical times was something that the West was fully behind, because it was politically expedient at the time, and now it's more politically politically expedient to back those aggressors who are against Israel. So, yes, the EU is chiming in as well on this issue.
Okay, so turning our attention back to Iran, that country recently announced that it executed a British Iranian national who was charged with spying for Britain. So, according to reports, he was hanged, but Lisa, it's not clear exactly when this exactly took place. So, he was actually arrested back in 2019. So, it's a little unclear at this point, right?
Right. So, Jeanette, as you know, there are foreign nationals being held in Iran's prisons for years, right? Canadians, Americans. There was obviously people from the UK as well. Many other European nations. There was a German individual who was held there. They are, and now one from Sweden. I'm just recalling as I'm going along, but really, these are their pawns, right? This is how they take in hostages to get what they want and to make political deals. Right now, they're having a crisis where they have these peaceful protesters being rounded up and being executed. So imagine these young people in their teens and 20s being rounded up and killed just for peaceful protest. And in between that, we're seeing as the international community is basically either sanctioning or thinking about sanctioning or basically teetering on how to call out Iran's regime because they haven't fully committed to calling out Iran's regime. Well, Iran is forcefully doubling down and saying, we're killing yours as well, not just our own peaceful protesters. So, yes, unfortunately, we did hear of this British man who was killed, and the family got the news this weekend.
Oh, that's terrible. Now, Lisa, Britain, of course, retaliated to this by withdrawing its ambassador to Iran.
Yes, so they withdrew their ambassador. That's the first step. But again, the EU has been on the fence about whether or not, for example, to put the Revolutionary Guard, this is the paramilitary arm of Iran's regime, on their global terror list. I mean, why is there such a wishy-washy global approach or strategy to dealing with Iran's regime right now? The brutality of it, and I understand they have this approach, they have this policy of wanting to get back into a nuclear deal with Iran. That's the dream of the Europeans. That's the dream of the Biden White House. But when the optics, when the facts, when it all changes, and you're watching this brutal regime crack down on its own, you're watching them pour billions of dollars into global terrorism that affects us here at home and our assets abroad. What's the question? Why not list them as a terror organization? Why not sanction them? And why not pull out of the nuclear deal and stand for regime change instead? If the goal is to procure security, on all borders, whether it's in the Middle East or in Europe or in the United States, and to make our assets safe in the region, wouldn't the number one way to do that is to get rid of this regime, as the people of Iran are asking for? Why are they trying to normalize relations with a regime that looks like it will not ever behave? And that's the question that we're dealing with today.
Okay, turning our eyes to the Pacific now, this is a big one. Could there be an Asia-Pacific conflict? Lisa, it looks like scholars and officials disagree as to whether China or North Korea will instigate the first major armed conflict in the Pacific region of the 21st century. So allies of the U.S., including Japan and Taiwan, who are in that region, are reacting by strengthening their military. So, Lisa, what's happening here? This almost sounds like World War III.
Right. And Jeanette, the fact that we're having this discussion points to one thing and one thing only: a weak foreign policy by the West, whether it's Europe or especially spearheaded by the White House in Washington, D.C., will allow actors like North Korea and China to even have an opportunity to flex their muscles. And that's why their neighbors are so worried right now. That's why we're talking about a potential World War III. When you have President Biden meeting with President Xi Jinping of China just a couple of months ago, they had a 3-hour conversation. And the only thing that President Biden walks away with is they're not going to invade Taiwan. Well, really, how do we know that? How do you really believe a dictator? He didn't press him on many of the other issues. He didn't press him on his presence in the region. He didn't press him on all of the lies about COVID and all of that. But yet he walks away. We did a great job, pats himself on the back, and thinks that he had a great conversation and that he's assured that China will not invade Taiwan. Well, the region and the neighbors have a different feeling about what China is up to, how they are really poking around and trying to instigate something. And the same goes for North Korea. Why are they conducting missile tests almost every day of the week right now? Why are they flexing their muscles, showing their might? What are they up to? And again, the fact that they're doing this, that they're even able to instigate, shows us that there's a weak foreign policy. They believe that they can play out the clock until President Biden is in office, until the end of his term, and they're doing exactly that.
Lisa, thank you so much for joining me today from Los Angeles. So great to have you on.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.